this story together. In South Shields, they're talking about possible gangland links to the shooting and murder of someone else at the site of the North's most infamous ambush spot. And yet, if you go back to the days of the Roman occupation, south of the Tyne was considered rather safer than all points north. That big river, the Tyne, acting as a natural barrier to keep the invader from the two tribes that were most likely to kill them, the Northumbrian Brigantes, or any of the Scottish clans. Yet a rich Roman trader had been cheating pretty much everybody that he dealt with right across the north. This he could easily do, as he had armed men to encourage his clients to sell him things at the most ridiculous prices. Any price is better than being blinded or having your child taken into the Roman army, or worse, having your daughter taken into one of their brothels. So Castros of Florenzi took his trade deep into Northumbria, visiting Alnwick, Hexham, and every tiny village and hamlet in between. Yet while stopping off at a village where Dudley currently stands next to Cramlington, he began negotiating with a farmer there known as Edmund to purchase 3 magnificent stallions. The farmer insisted that none were for sale as they were his breeding stock. Without them, his large herd of breeding mares would be useless. After a severe beating, he begged the Roman trader to let him keep 1 so he could stay in business. Despite losing an eye and being crippled, he fought as best he could to maintain a living for his family. Castros did let him keep 1, then ordered his men to geld it. He left laughing in his cart, dragging behind him 2 beautiful horses bought for a 50th of their value. And later that night, Edmund heard that the previous evening Castros had allowed 3 of his men to rape his 14-year-old daughter. She'd stayed silent, knowing that they would kill her father. And yet, despite a nasty sword wound to his side and an eye that had been pierced with a sword tip, he picked up a staff and a cudgel and headed off after the trader. And as he went, he gathered some of his friends together as a form of early posse. It was a waste of time going to the Roman consul, for the word of any Roman would be put before anyone else's. And it took almost 3 weeks before they discovered them camped where the car park at Marsden Grotto now stands. This was just far enough from other villages, and few would dare travelling along that dark, inhospitable coastal path at night. At the time, it was a woodland clearing with tall trees right up to the cliff edge, so Edmund and his men had no difficulty getting within 10 feet of the sleeping Roman. A diversion was created by hurling a live goat over the cliff edge some 20 feet away, making the 2 guards run off to investigate. They were set upon by 8 men with clubs who beat them unconscious. 3 other soldiers who were also sleeping were beaten into an even deeper sleep. Finally, Edmund pulled back the flap of Castro's tent to see him lying there with a boy aged around 8. The youngster looked terrified and Edmund beckoned him out. He then placed a noose around the Roman's neck before splashing his face with the remnants of a flagon of wine. Castros awoke in a fury until he saw the bloodied face of Edmund. His men held the Roman's arms as the vengeance began. The Roman offered to let him take his horses back, but this was not a bargaining chip, because he planned to do that anyway, and share all of the Roman's other misgotten gains with his friends. Edmund held a knife up against the man's eye, saying, "Have you any idea how it feels to kill a living eye?" And at that he jabbed it in just enough to pop it. A mixture of aqueous humour and blood trickled down his cheek. The Roman began howling, begging for his life, begging for his freedom. There are many in life who can dish it out, but very few can actually take it. Then, with a curved knife, the Roman's side was ripped open. And finally, Edmund gave a tiny knife to Castros. Looking at him with his only good eye, he said, "Your men raped my little Gwynny, and for that you must cut off your vitals. Do this and you live. Do not, and I will kill you with my bare hands." Realizing how desperate his plight was, he tried to sever his own penis. But the blade was quite blunt and he tried sawing at it. But that just created long, ragged cuts. "Hurry!" shouted Edmund, who knew that if a Roman patrol should stumble across them, they'd all be executed. For minutes that surely felt like hours, he tried to remove his penis and sack, leaving it a bloodied mess. Finally, Edmund strode forward, hit the Roman in the nose with a cudgel, and as he fell to his knees, with one swish of a sharpened blade, the man's vitals were then thrown into his face. The Roman was wobbling around, clutching the open wound where his balls had been. Edmund said, "Run, lest I change my mind," and the farmer pointed the direction for him to run, between two very big dark oak trees. The trader was barely able to walk until a sword point pierced his back, encouraging him to try that bit harder. Yet Edmund had pointed him to the cliff, and the Roman stepped out into nothing. Then about 10 feet down, the noose was pulled tight, breaking his neck and almost ripping his head off. The following morning, there were a group of Roman soldiers with headaches, yet not one who could identify those who had waylaid them. This one area of the northeast coast has a catalogue of murder and ambushes. For almost 400 years, it was a tiny coastal track with heavy woodland on both sides of the road. The perfect place for highwaymen or assailants to trap you and drag you away from prying eyes. It's known that around 560 people have been attacked and murdered on that very site. In more recent years, one of South Shields' more famous residents featured here too. Dolly Peel was perhaps South Shields' most famous fishwife. She also sold contraband, smuggled wine, and had dealings in illegal tobacco and liquor. She had a rather bawdy tavern in Shields near the old Coble landings, so that fishermen couldn't resist to pop in as soon as they got back with their catch. Yet Marsden was the place where much of her illegal stock was landed and hidden inside Marsden Rock, where even today you can see the deep-carved smuggler's hidey hole. The authorities knew she was doing these things, but just could never prove it. So instead, they sent a press gang to grab her husband and made him crew of a man-of-war. Rather than let him go, she forced her way on board, saying that she would operate the cockpit, and this she did, providing food and medical care. She also delivered 2 babies in the space between the cannons, hence the phrase, "to be a son of a gun." Dolly and her husband Robert returned to South Shields to find even fewer customs men than ever, so basically picked up from where she'd left off, setting up another rowdy inn near Marsden. And there's a poem from Dolly around that time. It's usually claimed to be anonymous, but many think Dolly did it. Those salty swearing sea dogs and tarry buccaneers with backy pipes, pigtails and gold rings in their ears, who spent their money handsome and took their ease ashore in my rowdy bar in Marsden with much sand across the floor. They bawled out many a ballad and all told thumping lies in fearsome deep-sea lingo that opened a landsman's eyes. They'd drained their brimming pewter and spat into the tide in many a galleried tavern along our blood-soaked waterside. Watching at their moorings the old Geordie colliers roll and the press gang tender waiting outside a Peggy's hole. The anchored ships upload their silks and laces fine with spices from the Indies along with rum and Spanish wine. They watched the busy scullers all plying with their fares from ships, from docks, from landings, all along penny pie stairs. And they saw the sturdy keelmen passing to and fro as the Shields men did on this old river, just to watch 'em come and go. So what happened to Dolly? Well, we know she made herself a small fortune and decided to